It's sort of what they haven't done yet, which is address the edge position. To me, and unfortunately, the spoiler alert is a lot of what we discussed before free agency. Not a whole lot has changed in terms of what we think is going to be prioritized. But with the restructure of Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack, so I guess those are sort of moves. And with the lack of an addition so far at the edge position, it just feels to me like that is naturally the most important thing heading into the draft outside of maybe wide receiver because of the other two restructures. We talked about John Johnson, so I don't want to jump into that too much. At this point, I just kind of expect that's going to happen. So I'm going into this thinking, what's left. And to me, all eyes are on those four restructures and those, two positions. So to me, it's what they haven't done yet, which is add an edge rusher. And granted, they could do that after the draft. They could just be, having a sort of a handshake agreement with Kyle Van Noy, and eventually he's going to come back. But for right now, to me, at 21, especially with the draft and the strength of this draft, it really does feel like edge at 21 for me.
Yeah, I think we'll see if they end up changing something. But like for me, like even if they did bring back Kyle Van Noy, I still wouldn't necessarily think that would rule out edge in the first round.
Fair enough.
This team I think needs to be able to execute the vision that Brandon Staley has, and I think that's one of the more important things of this draft. And I think we've learned a lot over the past couple of years, obviously, about what kind of style Brandon Staley wants to play. And I think in order to be able to effectively execute that style, you have to have the defensive talent to do so, and specifically the defensive line talent. So right now, like I think you feel good about the Chargers, quote unquote, starting five. If you are assuming that Austin Johnson comes back healthy, because you have Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, Morgan Fox, Austin Johnson, and Sebastian Joseph Day. I think you feel good about that five. Again, Austin Johnson's kind of up in the air right now. If you take him out and you want to say starting four without him, I think you feel good about that group, right? But you still need the kind of edge talent and defensive tackle talent to be able to really properly execute Brandon Staley's vision. And you look at teams around the league who are kind of running the same stuff. Like Vic Fangio is going to be in Miami with Bradley Chubb as his second best edge rusher, and he's got Jalen Phillips, and he's got Christian Wilkins, and he's got all these guys. They agreed to be their edge four, I think, is what's going to happen there. You look at what Philadelphia had this past year, and they weren't necessarily a pure Fangio disciple, so to speak, but a lot of similar concepts there. And they were so deep along the defensive line that Jordan Davis, a first-round pick, was hardly playing at the end of the season. So I think, like, regardless of what you think of Brandon Staley, like, I think he understands that the Chargers need more defensive line talent. And I understand that people will kind of point to the edge three not being like a quote unquote starter, but that's where you have to take guys to be legitimate dudes. And right now, to me, that's the clear cut need. And frankly, that was the case heading into free agency.
Yeah. And again, I have to repeat myself. The edge 3 or 4 on this team the last 3 years has played 800 snaps combined between edge 3 and 4, obviously, but still 800 snaps a year, including I think 1,000 last year because of Joey Bosa missing basically the entire year. So it's as long as this isn't like a project player who is someone who will barely see the fold, and obviously hoping that this person is not a bust. If they pick the right guy, this player could see 500-600 snaps. And I think that's great. And they should. Even if Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack are playing really, really well, you got to if you take one at 21, you got to get that edge rusher going, because even if Mack and Bosa play well, one of them is probably gone next year. So I need to know, and you need to know from that edge one what you have too. So I think they'll almost force that issue as well, because you really need to see what you have in this edge player.
Yeah, and I think for me, like one of the things that could be the theme of the past week is maybe flexibility, right? Being able to keep options open. So sure, like maybe it's not an edge rusher. Maybe you go out and bring Kyle Van Noy back and you essentially kind of run back the edge room, right? But then it's like that gives you less flexibility in the long term, right? Because if you don't draft an edge rusher this year in the first round or in the second round, like we'll see what happens with the edge rusher group in general. But I think in general, like first 2 rounds is probably where you want to take an edge rusher. If you don't, and you're going to head into next season without one of Joey Bosa or Khalil Mack, then next year you probably do absolutely have to take a pass rusher in the first round. Like you won't have that option to do anything else. And maybe next year's edge rusher class isn't as deep. This year I think you have probably 8 or 9 guys that I think you feel comfortable with taking, and with a potential top 53 pick or whatever the Chargers second pick is. So it's just, if the Chargers' goal this year is to maybe have some short-term flexibility, I think drafting an edge rusher makes a lot of sense for long-term flexibility as well.
Are you still seeing edge as the priority over wide receiver? I'm only asking. I think you do, but I'm asking because the chat is sort of, they'd like to know, I'm sure.
Yeah, I still am, and I think part of that is because I feel better about the chances of Mike Williams and Keenan Allen sticking around after next season. Like you really see pass rushers kind of fall off a cliff, and maybe that happens with Khalil Mack after next season. Maybe Joey Bosa has another season where he's just kind of banged up. And I think you feel better about where the Chargers are at receiver wise, also because of Josh Palmer. So there's some layers here. Like if we had seen more flashes from Chris Rumph, then maybe we feel differently. But we've seen Josh Palmer be an effective wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, and I think the Chargers would feel comfortable about him stepping into a larger role next season. So, and I think the other part of this is obviously the class. Like for me, I think this wide receiver class is just not the kind of group where you take a first round pick on. And we talked about this for our wide receiver rankings. Like if the Chargers at 21 take a receiver, and let's say it's Jordan Addison, right? Like, really, is that guy capable of being a wide receiver 1? That's what you have to ask yourself with the top 25 pick is this person capable of becoming a wide receiver 1, edge 1, tight end 1, running back 1, whatever? I don't think that's the case in this group. Like we talked about Quentin Johnson having the highest ceiling. Maybe that's who they end up going. Maybe he goes, significantly earlier than that. Whereas you have Nolan Smith, you have BJ Ojolari, you have Will McDonald. I think you feel comfortable about those guys reaching a potential edge 1 wide receivers or edge 1 ceiling over the wide receivers. And as Thomas Martinez points out, like this class is filled with wide receiver 2s and 3s. And that's what the Chargers need. They need a wide receiver 3 right now that can, be that long-term answer and give them some versatility. So it's just like, it's a combination of things for me, but like if I get the choice, I'm taking an edge rusher at 21 over a receiver in this class, like without any hesitation.
And as Eddie's talking about here, the Bolts haven't made any efforts to find a speed wide receiver in free agency. I mean, technically we don't know that, but right. I wonder what speedy wide receiver, unless you're again like a Jalen Guyton type, what speedy wide receiver would really want to come to the Chargers as is. Now, granted, money is money. Playing with Herbert sounds really good. But you have to go beat out Josh Palmer. Like how certain are you,
right,
in this 1-year deal you're probably going to get, that you're going to go beat out Josh Palmer? And then in this class, probably a rookie that gets drafted, let's say round 3. So you have to beat out Josh Palmer, maybe like say Marvin Mims or Trey Palmer or something.
Yeah.
How likely are you, how good are you feeling about yourself that you're going to go out and keep your job? So I don't even know if the Chargers are looking for someone or not, but I don't know which wide receiver is looking at this roster and thinking, okay, I'm at best a wide receiver 4, unless it's, Odell Beckham Jr., but that's not happening. So I just don't think the Chargers are, my point is, I don't think the Chargers are going to sign a wide receiver. I think it's more of a returner type.
Yeah, sorry. I was laughing at Solo's comment about trading the 2024 and 25 first round picks and getting Marvin Harrison Jr. Listen, man, Marvin Harrison Jr. is an elite talent, man. He's so much fun to watch. Every time I turn on Ohio State tape, it's just kind of ridiculous. So in general, like I think my kind of preferred process at wide receiver is you address wide receiver 4 in the draft and a day 2 pick. Like I think people misconstrue us saying we don't want a wide receiver in round 1, ideally, as like we don't want any new talent into the position room.
Right.
I think if you draft Marvin Mims, Tyler Scott, Jaden Reed, Trey Palmer, that kind of crowd, it does the same thing as drafting Jalen Hyatt in the first round, personally, or Quentin Johnson. Like, the Chargers need more speed. We all agree about that. But, this wide receiver 4 is not going to be, an immediate wide receiver 1, which I think is kind of the disconnect in my opinion. So, for me, like the vision at wide receiver is you take that wide receiver on day 2. Maybe you bring back DeAndre Carter to be your returner type. I think Ryan Ficken at least would want to upgrade kickoff returner, but DeAndre Carter is a fine punt returner. And then you add another person. Like, I think you have to have 6 receivers to be able to execute what Kellen Moore wants to do. So you can either sign 2 cheap veterans and draft your guy on day 2. You can draft your guy on day 2, sign another guy like Isaiah McKenzie, and then draft your returner on day 3. And there's some good options. I tweeted about a couple of them today. So like, I think the Chargers will add multiple bodies. I just don't think it's going to be necessarily the way that people are going to be happiest with.